India is the biggest buyer of vaccines in the world, with over 1.6 billion doses being ordered from various manufacturers. The Serum Institute of India has already produced 5 crore, which is 50 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, and has applied for emergency approval to begin mass rollout. I spoke to Dr. K. Srinath Reddy, who is the president of the Public Health Foundation of India, about where the country currently stands in its progress, the challenges that it could face, and when mass rollout could be expected. Professor Reddy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. As president of the Public Health Foundation of India and someone who's been extensively involved with the World Health Organization, where do you say that India stands right now in the vaccine development process, and when do you think mass rollout can be expected?
In terms of manufacture, I think we have a huge capacity. And even in the universal immunization program globally, about 60% of the vaccines were being provided by India. And we believe that even in terms of our manufacturing capacity for COVID-19 vaccines, wherever they may have been developed and wherever they may have been evaluated and provided regulatory approvals, the manufacturing capacity of India would come in very handy for the world, of course, for India. In terms of India developed vaccines themselves making the grade, in terms of trial evidence and regulatory approval, we'll have to wait and see. But we are hoping that even the inactivated vaccine that is being developed in India by ICMR and now is being produced and trialed by Bharat Biotech would make the grade, because that would give us a great advantage in terms of stable and ample supply of vaccines in the country, of a relatively safe vaccine, because some of the other vaccines could carry adverse effects, whereas an inactivated vaccine has the least risk of adverse effects.
Professor, when do you think a mass rollout can be expected in India? Because the UK has begun mass rollout, the United States has now granted emergency approval to Pfizer, and they've also began rolling out. When do you think India can do something like this?
So the answer to your question would be dependent upon when AstraZeneca and the Russian vaccines would submit their evidence of the claims that they have already made to our regulator, and how quickly our regulator can appraise and satisfy himself or herself on that issue. As far as Bharat Biotech is concerned, they still have to complete their phase 3 trial and then go forth with their full data. So my own impression is that AstraZeneca may get the regulatory approval by January, early January. The Russian vaccine possibly also, depending upon the depth of data they can provide and the regulatory approvals they can obtain elsewhere outside, which our regulator can also evaluate and respect. But as far as Bharat Biotech is concerned, I think it will be possibly late February or March by the time we see the regulatory clearances being completed and coming in. But the companies are seeking emergency use authorization and they're asking for early approvals. So we'll have to see how the regulatory process moves on. So that is one element. The second element, of course, is the volume that is available and how much the government is interested in procuring from within India and from outside, and how much of the supply chain will be expanded even initially, and how it will be expanded further later on. Those are all factors that will be dependent upon availability of vaccines, availability of the health workforce, and on a periodic reappraisal of the severity of the pandemic. If the pandemic seems to be ebbing, then the hurry for obtaining vaccines from all over the world will not be as urgent. Whereas on the other hand, if it appears that the pandemic in India, which appears to be at the moment settling down, resurfaces, then there could be an urgency in obtaining more vaccines and going ahead.
Professor, I recently had the opportunity to visit University College Hospital here in London. I spoke to Dr. Vikram Talalekar, who participated in the human trials for the Oxford vaccine. He seems pretty optimistic about it. And also the Serum Institute says they've manufactured 5 crore doses of it already. And just day before yesterday, the Foreign Secretary of the UK, he visited India and he was very optimistic about this entire partnership in producing the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Do you think this is suitable for India? Do you think it would work well for the country?
If it passes the regulatory tests, and there was a bit of a problem also with AstraZeneca in terms of the different dosing schedules. They had two strands, one with a full high dose schedule in both the doses, one with a low dose in the first one and the higher dose in the second one. And now they've done some phase 1 and 2 trials with the different dosing combinations. So there's a bit of a tap dance going on there in terms of the dosing schedules. But even if you take the two full dose schedules with 62% efficacy demonstrated, and hopefully the low dose, high dose combination with 90% efficacy also would get approved sometime, I believe AstraZeneca would be an efficacious vaccine. Is it a safe vaccine? At the moment, the trials suggest so, except for a couple of incidents that have happened, but nothing in terms of major adverse events that should put us off.
So, what challenges do you think India faces in the months to come, especially in terms of rolling out a vaccine?
Now, the problem in India is that you may not know everybody who has a comorbidity. You may know in the big cities, but in smaller towns and villages, it is possible that the health system may not have detected people with hypertension, diabetes, coronary artery disease. Therefore, you may be missing out some people with comorbidities. It's also true in India that you get these comorbidities at a much younger age than in the Western populations. And therefore, it's not unusual to see high rates of hypertension and coronary heart disease in the 30s and 40s, particularly in the 40s, and diabetes too. But therefore, you have to keep a cutoff point somewhere. Considering that the Western population is regarded to be at high risk in terms of age and comorbidities at 60 plus, in India, we are looking at 50 plus because of the younger age of onset of comorbidities, and then try and protect them first. And then later on, based on the availability of the vaccine, the logistics of finding the health workforce to administer the vaccine, we will probably go down the age from below 50 plus. But right now, in the essentiality criteria, people with known comorbidities, as well as the age factor, starting with 60 plus and then going to 50 plus, would be the criterion.
So my final question to you is, what would you say to those who are skeptical or hesitant about receiving the vaccine? Because you have this anti-vaccine movement that is being spread on social media and other channels. What would you like to say to them as a medical professional who has a breadth of knowledge on this?
Well, we have had a lot of experience with vaccines. Many vaccines have proved very good for humanity and have helped save humanity from deadly infectious diseases, smallpox being a case in point, measles being a case in point, and many others too. It is also true that some vaccines have had adverse effects, but that is why we need good clinical trials as well as post-licensing and post-marketing surveillance to continue to gather information on adverse effects in large number of people to satisfy ourselves about the safety. But in terms of the phase 3 trial data being adequately studied by the regulators, by the scientific community at large, and of course by the media as well, if the adverse effects are very minor and very few, the benefit that would accrue from a vaccine far outweighs any of those concerns. And that is where we definitely need to create vaccine confidence based on data, not based on claims, based on demonstrated data, and having a bunch of fairly skeptical scientists examining that data to find if there are loopholes. And if there are no loopholes, then they certify this is good enough to be given. So we must go through that process. So it depends partly on the integrity and scientific strength of the regulatory process. But once that happens, we should fight the anti-vaccine campaigns which are based on false information, false perceptions, and we should not prevent the benefit of the vaccine being obtained by the people at large. But again, there, it is not the pronouncements of a few top leaders that's going to inspire confidence. You need a constant open conversation with the people. Share as much information, including data. Not only get trusted voices to speak about it, but also have this in community-based networks, because that is where misconceptions and myths arise or get propagated, and that is where confidence is ultimately built up.